So it really feels like the political temperature in the U.S. is just hitting a boiling point, doesn't it? That kind of constant feeling of division, it seems, I don't know, more intense than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like a gut feeling. The numbers actually back this up. Gallup's research from early 2025, it shows the biggest ideological gap between Republicans and Democrats they've seen in 30 years. Just think about that.
It is pretty stark. And, today we're not just diving into the problem itself, though we need to understand it. We're really going to explore what's fueling this polarization.
Right.
We're drawing a lot from that Rational Ruminations article, Beyond the Echo Chamber, the one about street epistemology and AI polarization post-2024.
Yeah, that's the one.
But maybe more importantly, we want to focus on this really interesting and, well, potentially powerful way to perhaps bridge some of these divides that the article brings up.
Absolutely. And that rational ruminations piece, it does a good job laying out the forces at play.
Yeah.
You've got the hangover from the 2024 election, definitely. The challenges from AI-driven disinformation, that's huge. And then some of the big policy moves since the start of 2025, particularly around immigration, seem to be real flashpoints.
Things like the national emergency declaration at the border.
Exactly. And reinstating Remain in Mexico, those have become really, really contentious.
So for everyone listening, our mission today is kind of twofold. First, let's really try to unpack the different layers of this polarization we're all feeling. And second, to get a solid handle on a specific evidence-backed approach, this thing called street epistemology, that actually offers, well, maybe a bit of optimism for more constructive dialogue.
Okay, sounds good. Let's dig into this deepening divide then. The Rational Ruminations article mentions it's happening on two levels, right? It's not just about disagreeing on issues.
That's the ideological divergence part.
Right, but it's also about how people feel about the other side. Affective animosity, they call it.
Yeah, that's the term.
Like that gut level dislike or maybe distrust, just because someone's on the other team politically. Does that sort of ring true from what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. It resonates. And the data really highlights it. The article points out that Gallup finding from 2024, a record 77% of Republicans identifying as conservative and a majority of Democrats as liberal.
Wow, 77%.
Yeah. That kind of sorting within each party, it naturally leaves less common ground, doesn't it? It makes finding solutions harder.
And then you throw in the whole digital world, which often feels like it's just pouring fuel on the fire.
Definitely.
The article brings up research showing that online, the really negative, us versus them kind of language, that's what gets the clicks, the shares, the engagement.
Across multiple democracies, too, not just the U.S., it seems these platforms are almost structurally inclined to amplify inflammatory stuff because it grabs attention.
And it's not just the content, is it? There's research mentioned, I think, from Nature about the interaction patterns themselves.
Yes, exactly. That research found these really rapid spirals into antagonism online. It happens quickly, and it seems to happen regardless of the platform or even the topic being discussed. It's like a default mode online.
Which just feeds the polarization cycle.
Right.
And we can't really talk about this without bringing in artificial intelligence. The article discusses China's spamouflage network, how it shifted.
Into an AI meme factory, yeah. Specifically targeting social divisions here in the U.S. It's kind of sobering how these tools can be weaponized to sow discord.
And we've seen concrete examples like that AI robocall that sounded like President Biden during the New Hampshire primary.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
It just showed how easy it's become to create really persuasive fake audio. Imagine the potential to mislead people on a large scale.
For sure. Although it's interesting, the article does also note something from the R Street Institute, I believe.
What's that?
That rapid platform labeling and detection maybe limited the direct electoral impact of some of those high-profile deepfakes. Maybe there's some defenses starting to work a little bit.
Okay, that's a slightly more hopeful note. A small one, maybe.
Maybe. But we still have to remember that, according to Pew, over half of U.S. adults get news from social media at least sometimes.
Still a huge number.
And other research cited from Frontiers suggests a link between relying heavily on social media for news and having stronger negative feelings towards the other party. And also being more likely to accept false claims, especially among younger people, like high schoolers.
So it's like the misinformation clicks because it fits what we already believe or want to believe about our group or the other group.
Precisely. It taps into existing identity narratives. And the algorithms, which are built to maximize engagement, often end up amplifying exactly that kind of resonant, sometimes inaccurate information. Sage journals had work on this.
Makes sense. It's a cycle. Okay, so the rational ruminations piece looks at the digital side,
Mm.
but it also digs into some real-world policy decisions since early 2025 that have become, major battlegrounds. Immigration seems huge here.
Yes, that's definitely a focus. The declaration of a national emergency at the southern border, the renewed talk about wall construction, deploying troops, those were significant early actions.
Hmm.
And then bringing back the Remain in Mexico policy, expanding detention capacity.
Yeah.
These have all fueled the debate intensely.
And it wasn't just the administration acting alone, was it? Congress got involved too. The article mentions the Lake and Riley Act passing with bipartisan support.
That's right, bipartisan passage, but still highly politically charged, obviously.
Very charged. And then there was the move to transfer control of some federal borderland to the U.S. Army. That seemed to really ramp up the legal and political fights.
It did, but it's important to note, the article also points out areas where there is continuity or at least less division.
Right.
Well, the GPS program, for example, boosting domestic semiconductor manufacturing, that seems to have ongoing support, moving into what Brookings called a portfolio management phase. There's even talk of a GPS 2.0.
Okay, so common ground does still exist on some big things.
It seems so. And NVIDIA's plan for domestic AI server manufacturing, that aligns with the broader industrial strategy, too. It's a reminder that not everything is gridlocked or purely divisive.
That's a fair point. But the article also raised a concern, didn't it, about the State Department's Global Engagement Center?
Ah, yes. Its closure and replacement with a narrower anti-foreign propaganda hub.
Right. What was the worry there?
The criticism, highlighted in Wired, is that narrowing the focus might actually weaken overall U.S. defenses against disinformation more broadly. The GEC had a wider mandate, so this shift could, perhaps, leave gaps.
True hay is expensive.
Yeah, it is.
But is that really?
It's not really a selling point. Click subscribe, it's cheaper than hay and twice as fun.
I see. So, okay, we've sketched out this picture of deep polarization, digital influences, policy fights. But what's the actual human cost? The Rational Ruminations article touches on the psychological side, too.
It does, and it's quite concerning. Citing APA surveys, that's the American Psychological Association, it notes that for about 1 in 5 Americans, just following political news causes clinically significant distress.
1 in 5. Wow.
And, even more starkly, 5% reported having election-related suicidal thoughts. That really hits home, showing the intense emotional toll this climate is taking.
That's heavy. And it's not just about disagreeing with policies, is it? There was that Gallup finding the article mentioned.
Right, about how people perceive democracy itself. Their feelings about whether democracy is working well seem to be driven more by their partisan feelings, like, is my side winning, than by objective measures of how institutions are actually functioning.
So it's like feelings are facts in this environment.
That's essentially what the article suggests, yeah. Perceptions driven by partisanship become the reality for many people.
Okay, so we've seen the drivers, the impacts. It's a pretty challenging picture. Let's shift gears, though, to the more hopeful part. How do we start bridging this divide? The Rational Ruminations piece really spotlights street epistemology. For listeners who aren't familiar, can you break that down?
Sure. Street epistemology, or SE, it's basically a conversational method. But instead of arguing about what someone believes, the focus is on how they came to believe it.
How they know what they know.
Exactly. It's about exploring the reasoning process, the evidence, the reliability of the method someone used to arrive at their conclusion. And the really promising part is the research suggesting it can actually reduce that affective animosity, the U.S. versus them hostility.
The article mentioned a specific study, 2024, Nature Human Behavior.
Yeah, that was a key piece of evidence. They basically paired Democrats and Republicans for structured video chats using SE techniques. They found a 14% immediate drop in effective polarization right after the chat.
14% just from one conversation.
Apparently so. And what's maybe even more interesting is that an 8% reduction was still measurable 3 months later. It suggests these kinds of conversations might have a lasting positive impact, not just a fleeting one.
That is genuinely promising. So how does focusing on how the epistemology part help tackle something like AI-driven misinformation? That seems like a different beast.
Well, think about it. AI misinformation often works by bypassing critical thinking, right? It hits emotional buttons or mimics trusted sources. SE by focusing on what's called epistemic reasoning, basically, how we evaluate evidence and justify beliefs. It directly strengthens the skills needed to resist manipulation. It encourages that critical thinking about any claim, asking, how sure are you, and what makes you that sure? It's about examining the foundations of a belief.
So it's less about throwing more facts at someone and more about helping them examine their own thinking process.
Exactly. And the article points out this aligns with findings from meta-studies, too. These broader analyses show that interventions focused on teaching source evaluation skills or finding shared values tend to work better at reducing misperceptions than just simple fact-checking alone.
Which makes sense because fact-checking can sometimes backfire if people feel attacked.
Right. SE aims for a more collaborative exploration. And the article then offers some concrete ideas for how SE could be implemented more widely.
Like these hybrid dialogue hubs. What's the idea there?
The thinking is to blend the strengths of both formats. You'd have in-person workshops using SE, which can really build empathy and rapport.
Face-to-face connection.
Right. And then follow up with online sessions to kind of maintain those gains in understanding and keep the dialogue going over time. The Nature study suggested this kind of sustained engagement helps.
Okay. And what about source reflection prompts? How would those work?
These are basically little nudges designed to get people thinking about the credibility of an information source before they know whether it confirms their existing views or not.
So you try to get them to evaluate the source on its merits first, before their partisan shields go up.
That's the goal, yeah. Trying to short-circuit that motivated reasoning we all do sometimes.
And the last one mentioned was using policy-neutral case studies.
Yeah, the idea here is to kick off conversations by looking at policy areas where there's actually been some bipartisan agreement or success.
Like the CHIPS Act you mentioned earlier. Or maybe infrastructure projects.
Exactly, things like that. By starting there, you can potentially identify shared values or common goals first, build a little bit of common ground before wading into the more contentious topics. It's about establishing a foundation for discussion.
So pulling it all together, the main argument from the Rational Ruminations article seems to be, yes, polarization is deep, it's complex, it's worrying, but it's not necessarily like an impossible problem to solve.
Right. It's not insurmountable.
And using these structured dialogue methods, particularly street epistemology, gives us a research-backed pathway to actually start chipping away at the hostility.
Precisely. It highlights that these kinds of careful, curiosity-driven conversations, the ones focused on understanding how we believe things, can be a really valuable tool, especially now in this age of constant, often unreliable information flow.
So wrapping up our deep dive today, we've seen how political polarization in the U.S. is this really tangled, not ideological gaps, emotional animosity fueled by digital platforms, AI, specific policy fights.
And we touched on the real human cost, the psychological burden it places on people.
Yeah, definitely. But the core takeaway, really drawing from that Rational Ruminations piece, is that this intense division isn't necessarily our permanent state. There are tools.
That's right. And methods like street epistemology, focusing on our reasoning and promoting respectful inquiry, they offer a tangible, evidence-based way forward. Maybe not a magic bullet, but a way to potentially reduce that partisan hostility, one conversation, one interaction at a time.
Sign up for our free course at navigatingbeliefs.com. It really does make you wonder, doesn't it? If these carefully structured conversations, the ones focusing on how we know things, can actually measurably reduce political hostility.
What could the wider implications be? For how we all engage with information, how we talk to each other in this increasingly complex world. Maybe just pausing to question the foundations of our own beliefs and genuinely trying to understand the foundations of others is, I don't know, a more powerful thing than we often give it credit for. Something to think about.